Welcome back to the Holistic Health Bites podcast. Today, we're going to have a fun conversation and a really informative conversation around how to handle mental health and how that relates to metabolic health. I am joined by an esteemed expert, Dr. Christina Bjorndal, and welcome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, can you just take a few minutes to introduce yourself and tell everybody kind of how you got into what you do now?
Sure. My name is Christina Bjorndal. I'm a naturopathic doctor practicing in Edmonton. I'm also an author and a speaker, and I haven't always been those things. So I started my journey into the natural world after I actually had a suicide attempt, which left me in a coma with kidney failure. And at that point in my life, I was navigating my mental health using five psychotropic medications and just wasn't actually getting better on those. So after that, what I, sort of time, which I refer to as a spiritual crisis, I realized I need to figure out another way to navigate my health. And so I've turned to naturopathic medicine for that and eventually made a career change. So that is the story in a nutshell.
Oh, that's such a powerful story. And, like so many of us, we come into this because of our own journeys. And, that journey always looks a little bit different, but that's ultimately what brings us to where we are. It's either our own personal journey or someone in our personal lives, usually, that dictates this. So it's not terribly surprising to hear that that's also how you got into this, was from your own journey. So can you tell us a little bit more about, how you're managing things now and even what you recommend to the patients that you work with that's different than maybe the conventional model that you had been under that you found wasn't really helping you? What is it that you focus on now?
hmm So my book is called Beyond the Label: 10 Steps to Improve Your Mental Health with Naturopathic Medicine. And so I explain to people that there's four aspects to you as a person: physical, mental, emotional, spiritual. Our Western system and a lot of functional people in the functional medicine space as well are really just focused on that physical level. So what I do differently is, sure, I focus on that, but I also have training in 6 types of psychotherapeutic counseling techniques. So I'm working on the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual aspects as well. So when it started for me in terms of my journey, it started by seeing an orthomolecularly trained psychiatrist. So a nutritionally oriented psychiatrist. For people who don't know what orthomolecular means, it just means the right molecule to support your individual health needs. And so I started with that. But what I wasn't telling people, practitioners, was that I also had an eating disorder. So you can supplement yourself and you can make that choice over a pharmaceutical, and you will hopefully, likely, if you're taking the right nutraceutical support and botanical support, get better. However, if you don't look at the underlying eating issues that a person has, then that may only be a band-aid on that side as well. And that was the case for me. So eventually I had to address my eating issues. I had to recognize that, taking niacin and 5-HTP was not actually much different than that pharmaceutical, still on the physical level. One's more natural, obviously, but it wasn't really the root cause. And that's what I endeavor to do, is figure out, well, what's the root of this person's issue? Recognizing that there's more than one root.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a powerful message because this applies to not just mental health disorders, although directly, of course, mental and emotional things directly apply to our mental health, but it applies to all chronic disease, all healthy living, all the things. We have to take all four of those pillars into account in order to live a truly healthy life, regardless of what your current condition is that you're trying to work on. So I think that's really powerful. And I agree with you that so much in the functional medicine space has just use supplements instead of medications. And really, that's still not getting to the problem. I mean, in a temporary state, it can help fix an imbalance, can help kind of bring the body back into balance. But ultimately, yeah, you want to get to the point where your body's doing what it's supposed to do and you don't need those supports.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So, maybe let's just go through each one of the pillars and let's talk about a couple of things that maybe people do wrong in each arena, and then some things that maybe they can do, low hanging fruit kind of stuff that they can really prioritize.
Yeah, sure. So with that physical level, first we want to understand there's 3 macro systems kind of running the show. So you've got your neurotransmitters, you've got your neuroendocrine or hormonal systems, and then you have your immune system, and your organs and detoxification. So those are the three sort of big players in the field that is your body, working within your body, if you will. So that's sort of the first job as a health detective. You got to figure out, well, which of these macro system or systems do you need to be supporting? In my case, it was all three. So then the 10 steps I talk about, the first one is, no surprise, going to be nutrition, right? And then with a little bit of supplements, and you might be on a little bit of medication. So with supplements, I'll just mention it that there's three things that people are doing wrong when it comes to supplementation. They're taking the wrong form of a nutrient, they're taking the wrong dose, or they're taking one with non-medicinal ingredients that aren't beneficial. So those are the things that you want to be looking into and making sure you're correcting if those are not correct within you. And the three rules of prescribing, whether it's a nutraceutical, botanical, pharmaceutical, it's same as in real estate, which is, so in real estate, it's location, location, location. And in dosing, I just gave it away. Dose, dose, dose. That's the most important thing, is the dose. So we start with nutrition. So it's like we're going to build a health house. So the foundational 4 building blocks: nutrition, sleep, exercise, managing stress. The second level of your health house relates to the stress management piece. So your thoughts, your emotions, how you behave and react in the world, and your ability or inability to set boundaries. Third level of your health house, we're building a beautiful mansion here, is the environment from 3 perspectives: quality of the air, food, and water. Understand there's chemicals disrupting all of us. This is really important. If you start taking a pharmaceutical, for example, and by all measures, you should feel better if it's the right neurotransmitter, right? So if you don't feel better, I gotta ask yourself a few questions. Okay, well, maybe it's the wrong neurotransmitter. Maybe it's dopamine. I'm supporting serotonin. Maybe there's something from the environment blocking the receptor and it can't get in. So it's not a deficiency problem at all. It's a blockage problem. Or maybe it's the wrong macro system. Maybe it's my hormones, actually. So that's important to really consider. Second idea under the environment, there's 3 pieces of that puzzle, is epigenetics versus genetics. So genes load the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. Super important. In my case, with my mental health labels that I've had, which is vast and long, I would ask the doctor, well, why? It's a very common question to ask. Why is this happening to me? And he said, well, it's genetic. And I'm adopted. So I'm like, well, how do you know that? Can't look to my left or my right to verify the truth of that statement. So I didn't adopt that as the truth. So that's very powerful. So remember that just because you might have this long history in your family of condition A, B, or C, doesn't necessarily mean it's going to manifest in you. There is something also sort of on the flip side of that, though, if we're going to play devil's advocate, there is something called intergenerational trauma. But the same thing, I love the title of this book by Mark Wallen, which is, it didn't start with you. So even though you might be bringing something in intergenerationally, you can stop that, right? So third area under the environment is neuroplasticity, which is very important to understand, not only from the brain perspective, but body perspective. You're not the same person from day to day. You give yourself some new substrates to work with, you can build a new you, essentially, right? I feel better at 57 than I felt at 17, right? The concept of aging we have in our society is not healthy. We need to rewire that and age well so other people look forward to it. So that's the environment. Next area is compassion. Next area is spirituality. That's your health house that you're living in. We're going to plant that on a property that's rooted and grounded in love. Because at the end of the day, it all comes down to that. Do you love yourself enough to take the steps that I'm going to ask you to take? So that's really important, because I can tell you, when I woke up out of that coma, you think I was happy to still be here on the planet? Not at all. In fact, I think I was more depressed than prior to the attempt. So I was not loving myself. And people who are struggling with being here on the planet with us, they aren't loving themselves either. So this is really important. How much do you love yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? 10 being the best. Super rare for me to get an answer over 5 when I'm asking that. So, take a second to answer that for yourself, And a similar question along that same vein is the compassion piece. How compassionate are you with yourself? And I can tell you, for me, I had an inner critic running the show, right? And while that served me to be this overachiever, type A, success type person, underneath it all was this mask of insufficiency, of not good enoughness that was really driving me to overachieve. And then that led to burnout, So anyway, that's the steps, that's the journey, and it's doable, it's possible. You can heal, you can feel better, right? As you age, like there's so many myths we can bust here.
Yeah, I love it. And I think it's 100% true. I am the same way. I feel much better at my present age than I ever did before because I'm focusing on all the right things now instead of just sort of letting life happen or letting circumstances dictate how I feel about things. I empower myself to take control over the choices that I make and the way that I live my life and all of these things. And I think it's not an easy journey by any means. There's a lot of work that goes into it, but it's so worth it when you get to the other side and you just feel amazing every day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's obviously a lot to that whole building the house appropriately and finding the right foundation to put it on. So what do you usually start with? How do you unravel this for people who want to employ something like this to figure out, is it a neurotransmitter? Is it a hormone? Is it a toxin? What's the underlying problem? How do you approach getting started with someone?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I always start with the first piece of that, the first building block, which is nutrition, right? And then your connection with yourself, your relationship to food, and that's there's just so much that someone can do just with that nutritional piece alone, and that's where I started for many years, until I stumbled. So, and therein lies the unraveling of looking at everything else, right? So starting with that, and because we're really off track with nutrition in our society, like really off track. I like Michael Pollan. He wrote a book called In Defense of Food, right? Eat food, mostly plants, not too much. I'm not here to necessarily advocate for any particular. I just think we've made it super confusing as well as in the health space about people are just really confused about what to eat. And so for me, I'm pretty simple. I'm a pretty basic person, and you can get fancy for sure. But if you just do the simple basic things, then I think, you can, and it's starting even just with as simple as your coffee water intake. Most people are out of balance there.
Yeah.
Looking at sugar, right? And this is about metabolic health. So sugar is a big, huge disruptor. It's also a super addictive substance. And I've mentioned I've had an eating disorder, so sugar was my drug of choice, right? So, navigating that as best as you can. That's where I often start. But then I'm also always figuring out, of those three, the reality is for a lot of people, the first question is, when did things begin? So that gives you an insight into the hormonal piece of the puzzle. So if something begins in your teenage years, then that is the hormones are rapidly changing in your teenage years. So that's what we have to really focus on. And then with women, how is that correlating with your cycle? And, is there mood shifts in the luteal phase? And so that gives you insight into that macro system. But the reality is that it's often all three with people, you know, especially with mental health.
Yeah, and because there's so many things that feed into it.
Mhm.
The brain isn't just this own little thing. It controls everything. It's impacted by everything. Really, our whole body is. There is no one simple fix for any health challenge because we're so interconnected. We're a complex ecosystem. And so, yeah, I think most health conditions probably on some level do involve all of those things. Obviously, some are driving the ship more than others, but
Yeah.
they're all involved. I mean, spiritual stuff can manifest as diabetes, can manifest as, cancer, can show up in lots of different ways. And so I do think those are the appropriate things to pay attention to, regardless of what your health challenge is. So
Yeah.
I
Two
think
things I
that's
was
great
going to
advice.
say. Two things I was going to say about that. So I recently spoke at a cancer conference on the spiritual aspect of cancer, right? So that it's really important. And the other piece I forgot to mention, which is really crucial, is the year before I developed the eating disorder, which was when I was about grade 9, I took antibiotics for several months to address acne. which, as we know, is a suppressive therapy, didn't really address anything. Well, at the time, sure, cleared it up, but then you go off of it, your problem comes back, you haven't solved anything, right? And we weren't talking about the gut microbiome back in the 1980s. So I really want people to know this, and as you know, there's this huge relationship between the gut and the brain, bidirectional. And it's really, I sort of feel like, goodness me, what is leading the show here? I actually think it's, we talk about it's the brain leading the way. It's really the gut leading the way. So for people, and I'm not saying, be clear here, I'm not saying never to take an antibiotic. I guess I am saying don't take an antibiotic if you've got acne. That's not the indication for it, right? That is not the indication for take an antibiotic if you've got a bacterial infection that's going to take your life out. Take the antibiotic then, right? But don't take it for what it's not intended for, right? Anyway, and if you do it, now you've disrupted the gut microflora, and that's fine. You can fix all that. But if you don't fix it, then we're going to be running into probably some health issues.
Yeah. And that's where the gut is so powerful because it's changing all of those levers. Your
Mhm.
bacteria are directly responsible for what nutrients you absorb, what directly responsible for getting rid of waste products, directly responsible for neurotransmitter production and elimination and usage and cell signaling and just all the things. The gut's really
Oh,
what's driving all of those different pillars. So yeah, we definitely have to pay attention to that.
yeah, it's a big piece, big piece.
So I know you don't necessarily subscribe to any one particular diet plan, which I think is great because we all have different preferences and needs and purposes in our lives. But what are some nutritional strategies that you have found, either foods that really make a negative impact on, this overall mental and physical health standpoint, and also some foods that really do drive the needle for better
Yeah,
to make things better?
yeah. Yeah, actually, you know what? I do subscribe to one nutritional plan, and it's the essential diet that I wrote. So it's just a little nutrition book that gives you 2 weeks eating plan. And I call it the essential diet. Why? Because there are essential nutrients you need that you can't get and you cannot make. Right? We upgrade the iPhone every year, but we don't upgrade the human being. And if we did upgrade the human being, there's a few things we would upgrade. We would upgrade your ability to make tryptophan, right? Your ability to make phenylalanine, ability to make vitamin C, right? There's things that we would upgrade. But anyway, so that's what I subscribe to. But to answer your question, I'm like, my philosophy, because I've had an eating disorder, my philosophy has always been to increase the good within, and that out, over time, the intention hopefully would be that it's going to outcompete some of the bad. When I went to see a naturopathic doctor the first time, I had to cut out wheat, dairy, sugar, eggs, chocolate, tomatoes. I think those were the 6 things. And I'm like, what's left to eat, right? I didn't know what quinoa was. I didn't know how to say it, spell it, cook it. I knew nothing, right? Like nothing. So being a patient, I understand what it's like when you come in and the doctor says, cut out wheat, all those things. It's like, whoa, right? If you're used to eating all that. But really, I like JJ Virgin. She has 7 foods that you can eliminate for 7 days. Is more from a weight loss perspective. But the thing is, if a person has these beliefs, we do have to get to that and the emotional side too, right? But basically, increasing the tryptophan forming foods. So that's protein. Tryptophan's an essential amino acid, right? You cannot make it. So I was a vegetarian. And I was a horrible vegetarian. There weren't even any vegetables in my diet. Like I was a carbitarian and a total addict to sugar. Okay, that was me pretending I was a healthy vegetarian, right? Like my friends would be like, what vegetables are you eating? I'm like, what are those? So I've come a long way in the nutrition world, believe me. But yeah, so making sure, so I'm not anti-protein, but if you are a vegan or a vegetarian, that's fine. You can do that. Then, but make sure you're eating those essential, you got to get them somehow, and you can do it vegetarian from a vegetarian perspective, but you got to make sure you're doing it.
Yeah.
Thing. I wasn't. So, and then to eliminate, I think the biggest evil is our friend sugar, right? I think it's the biggest evil, and it's more addictive than cocaine. It cranks up that dopamine, center in you. It's leading to all the metabolic dysfunction. You're getting on the train to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. Like there is no sweet reward in sugar.
Yeah.
So, and then the whole fluid thing, as I mentioned to you, you're 70% water. You're not 70% Coca-Cola or Pepsi, right? You're not 70% coffee. So just that alone, getting those things out, pop, diet pop, carbonated vegetables. Are we going to start a new thing? Carbonated vegetables?
It
Carbonated
might be
drink.
popular.
Yeah. Carbonated, a lot of people have soda streams and stuff. Carbonation, that's not how nature intended your water to be. And that leads to long-term use of carbonated water leads to osteoporosis. So anyway, I'm going off target here a little bit, but there's so much you can do with just
Yeah.
one, like pick one little thing,
Yep.
pick one thing and
Yep.
dial that in, then get
Yeah.
to the next one, right?
Yeah.
And
I'm a big fan of just eat real food.
yeah,
Get rid of stuff that doesn't exist in nature as much as you possibly can. Of course, we're all going to have those moments when you just have to eat something convenient because it is what it is. But the less often you can let that stuff happen, and the more often you can eat real food, whatever that looks like for you,
yeah,
the better. And so I think that's
exactly.
great advice.
Yeah,
And
circle
keep
the
it simple.
grocery store. Yeah, don't go up and down. I
Yeah.
started off, don't go up and down those aisles. I started off, I did mention Michael Pollan, and I meant to mention the quote that he came up that I heard him say, which is we've given up 2 hours a day in the last 30 years or more. And we've given those 2 hours up to technology, and we've lost eating, cooking, and exercise.
Yep.
And it's true.
Yeah.
So get back
It
to
is.
basics, like you're saying, back to basics, whole food, real food, grow it yourself if you can,
Yeah.
and and then adjust your fluids and see where you are.
Yeah.
How you feel.
I I see people so often that they try to make it this big, fancy, complicated, extensive thing that they're obsessed with, frankly, which you're just trading a food addiction or whatever your current lifestyle situation is for this new obsessive, healthy, complicated tracking everything, counting everything, weighing everything, packing all your foods and snacks and all the things and these complicated recipes and meal plans and all the things. And of course that only lasts like a week and then you're like, I'm exhausted, I don't, who has time for this? Well, yeah, don't make it so complicated.
Exactly.
Simple. If
Yeah.
you're an omnivore, eat meat and vegetables. Simple. You don't need a recipe for that. You just
Didn't.
meat and vegetables. Same thing with eggs, you can make an omelet. You don't need a recipe for this. Like, we really just need to get back to the basics, do the foundational things. The fancy stuff is great. You can do all these fancy lab tests, you can do all these fancy supplements, all the things. That's great. But none of that'll work if you haven't done the basics.
That's right.
You got to do the basics.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, and it does. It comes back to those foundational building blocks, and you want to make it sustainable and doable for yourself. And that's where that keeping it simple is so important. You can batch cook, you can just a little bit of, cook up a bunch of chicken breasts, and then, you've got them, and then throw in whatever, I'm very, keep it very simple. I mean, the other piece when you're ready to sort of dial it up a notch is to look at this organic piece of the puzzle. So I know that for myself, when I looked at because I mentioned the chemicals from the environment, they play a big role. There was a study done on umbilical cord blood. They looked at the level of chemicals across 10 umbilical cords, and there was over 270 contaminants found. So our children are being born with their cups full already. And then, you enter the world and perhaps you came out via C-section. So now you've missed that first inoculation of good bacteria that we were talking about a few minutes ago. That gets seeded your gut microbiome when you travel down the vaginal canal. So there's a lot of people on the planet now that missed that step.
Mm-hmm.
Even more important to dial that in for yourselves. And then the food that you eat, right? Fermented foods are going to help your gut. So there's so much that we can do that is simple, but yet really impactful.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. And just we just really have to get back to the basics, get back to the simple things, get back to focusing on what we've done throughout all of human history. Eating real food, sleeping when it's dark, drinking water, fermenting stuff is great. That's what we used to do before we had refrigerators. That's how food lasted longer. I mean, these are all the like
Canning.
ancestrally appropriate things.
Yeah, canning,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
We don't do that
absolutely.
anymore. We
No.
do in our home, but
Yeah. A
most
lot of
people
people
don't
don't.
know how
Yep.
to can.
Yep.
preserve, right? You had to preserve your food because if
Yeah.
you live in the north, as I do, winter's coming. So you got to preserve the harvest for
Yep.
the to get you through when there's no food to be found, right?
Yep.
Because you're
Yep.
layered in 10 inches of snow.
Right. So, what are some things that people can do more on the emotional and spiritual side of things that are maybe not food directly related, but that are just, daily habits or things that they can start implementing?
Yeah, so this is a important piece. So for myself, the I was taught this by my naturopathic doctor. So the first step is you really want to be mindful of the nature of the thoughts that you're thinking. Because if there is an inner critic running the show, then those thoughts are going to move you more into a sympathetic or stressed state. So you want to understand that the nervous system is the queen system in the body. It's the top system running the show. And there's two branches, sympathetic and parasympathetic. So think stressed or relaxed, inner critic, inner cheerleader, ego versus soul, fear or love. And as I mentioned, right, love is the thing that we're always wanting to be mindful of. Well, how are we relating to ourselves? So this is important also when it comes to nutrition, because nutrition and when you're eating and eat your food and digesting your food, that only happens in a parasympathetic state. So if you're chomp chomp swallow, eating on the run, driving through the, drive through, shoveling things down your throat, and you weren't even aware that you ate the hamburger, and now you're reaching for another one, you're in a sympathetic state and you're not going to be getting full benefit from your food, number one. And number two, that just leads to lots of digestive concerns, gas, bloating, constipation, or loose stool, pain, heartburn, all of that stuff. So that is really, really important that you understand that your thoughts create neuropeptides. Neuropeptides affect the hormones that get produced, and the hormones that get produced affect how you feel. That is called psychoneuroimmunology. Basically, a big fancy word to say your thoughts affect your physiology. So for me, it starts by teaching this approach, which I will refer to as the R's. So basically, the first one is recognizing the nature of your thoughts. Are they are they serving you or sabotaging you? Then you want to refrain from following those thoughts around and around and around if you recognize that they're sabotaging you. And you refrain by relaxing into the body. We just do 2 deep breaths. Usually I ask patients to just pause and then take 2 deep breaths, connecting with themselves and understand that we want to get in the gap between one thought leading to an emotion, leading to the next thought, leading to the next emotion, to the next, this spiral that you can get stuck in. And I will tell you that every suicide attempt I've had, and there's been 3, started with a thought, right? I mean, maybe it didn't start with a thought. Maybe it started with the poor nutrition and not having the neurotransmitter and all that kind of stuff. But I guarantee you that there was a thought involved. Okay. And I followed every single thought down and I didn't know how to interrupt it. So my doctor, my naturopath, he taught me that I am not the cloud of depression that I'm currently in. Up until that point, I felt like I was the cloud. I'm like just walking Eeyore, right? I'm just one with the cloud. And he taught me that, Chris, no, man, you're the sky. And as the sky, actually, the sun is still shining and you can hold all kinds of weather, i.e., all kinds of emotions. You can hold them all. You're the container for that. You're the home for that. But your thoughts, actually, you got to learn to get a little discerning about those. And so that's sort of this R approach. So recognize, refrain, relax, and then the 4th step is repeat the first 3 steps, right? Over and over. 5th step, I added as this recovering overachiever that I am. It comes from cognitive behavioral therapy, which is to take the thought you recognized and to then rephrase it. Now, for me, that was very difficult, and I was very resistant to this idea I probably struggled 20 years longer than I needed to because of that. I was resistant to affirmations because if you had said to me, oh, hey, Chris, change your thoughts, change your life, I would have rolled my eyes at you because I felt like you were implying that I was intentionally causing my issues on purpose. And I didn't feel that I was, right? But no one had taught me this, that there's another voice that lies within me other than this critic there's actually a soul that's whispering to me. And some of my depressions, I really feel like this is an out there view that I have, that I felt stuck between two masters, if you will. I'm used to listening to the inner critic that's telling me, you're not good enough, you got to keep trying harder, and telling me that I got to keep pursuing success on the material level. And this other voice inside of me that's like, Chris, why don't you just listen to us over here? Come this way. And I didn't know who to listen to, so I just kind of get stuck, and then I cave in, and I fell into many depressive episodes, right? So,
Mhm.
so Dr. Hughes taught me to listen to this, to finally not silence, but just allow. I mean, this is a fancy way to say meditation, I guess, right? Just to let the thoughts go by. You know what? I don't need to cling and attach and fuel and feed, and I can lean into stillness, into the gap, and then embrace what that has to offer. And that is relaxation, parasympathetic, calmness, right? Peace. So that's this is just is so important, so important, because we have this subconscious mind that's running 90% of the show here. And it's when you bring the subconscious conscious into the conscious, then you can do something with it.
Yep.
But when it's hiding in the recesses and in the shadows, and this is where self-sabotage comes in, super important. People with nutrition and who, you probably see, I see lots of people who want to adjust their weight, right? Have to address the self-sabotage piece of the puzzle. And that's at play whenever you ask someone to do something and they don't do it. So they come to you, I want to lose weight. So you say, eat whole foods. They come back and then you ask, did you eat whole foods? And they're like, no. Okay. So there's something going on here that we need to investigate. What's at play here in the subconscious mind? Not from a place of judgment, blame, criticism, not at all. Just like, hey, let's try to figure this out. What's going on? You know? So it's I'll give you a concrete example of how that might look. So in my life, I worked in the corporate world. I reported to a CEO. Meanwhile, I'm wearing this mask. Oh, I've got it all together, but I'm, had 2 suicide attempts in that time frame. So clearly didn't have it all together. Was suffering a lot, but not feeling like I could say anything about it. And I wanted to leave my job, but I would never would leave my job. And my friends would be like, come on, after a decade, they're like, come on, I'm sick and tired of hearing about you. Like, what's your problem? Right. And my problem was that you're always going to do what you feel more safe doing, whatever's going to keep you safer. So even though that current job was sucking the life out of me, it felt safer to me to stay there than to risk rejection looking for another job, because my core wound being adopted is rejection and abandonment. So I'm going to stay over here because there's no risk for me, even though it's sucking the life out of me. I'm never going to put myself up for refusal, because that's my wound. That's my core wound. So until I learned about that, I wasn't able to leave my job. And when I did leave my job, I had to go back to high school to become a naturopathic doctor. I went back to high school at the age of 33. Like, it was not an easy road for me to walk to become into this profession. But, I also realized that I can't keep walking down that road the way I'm walking, because I don't know if I'm going to be alive, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway, wow. Where did
No.
we at? What question did you ask?
No, I think that's all amazing. And I think, I've heard similar stories or similar explanations that, literally our thoughts do become our lives. The trick is identifying that thought, because it seems so just like automatic. It just is what it is. This is my state. It feels like a fact. And it's not. So the hard part is identifying that thought, like for you, the abandonment or that
Yeah,
fear of rejection kind of thing, which I think is a pretty common one. I think a lot of us have that one.
yeah,
But identifying what that is, because then you can take action on it. You can be intentional and direct your brain to think something different. And it's much easier to get to that rephrasing once you identify it. But if you haven't identified it, then you can't rephrase it. And so that's the real work to do, is identify what is that sentence in your brain that keeps replaying, that's taking you down the wrong path, that feels so automatic that you don't have control over it. But you do. You just have to learn that little trick. Once you identify the thought, then you can rephrase it. I think that's a powerful story.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
I
And
think so much of our lives, we live in that place of just automatic living. And the subconscious is really driving the ship. But that's what makes us human, is we can direct our brains to think something different. We have to train it, but we can be much more in the conscious brain and less so in the subconscious brain. Let the subconscious brain like tell your heart to beat and tell your lungs to breathe and do all the things that you need to do to survive, and direct everything else that actually leads your life to the conscious brain. But it takes work.
it does. Yes, and it does. But it's doable.
It is.
And it's not hard. A simple exercise I can give you is, so one of my teachers I've studied with many, many people in the mental, emotional, spiritual realm. One of them is Eckhart Tolle, who is the guy that's, all about the power of now. And I did a retreat with him, and one of the exercises he gave us was to just pay attention to something that you do every single day, like, having a cup of tea or taking the elevator, driving to work, whatever it is, because there's so much repetitiveness to our day. So I chose the shower, thinking, and if you'd asked me going into the shower if I thought I was thinking anything when I was in the shower, I would have told you, no, I don't actually think I'm thinking anything. Well, when I got in the shower, actually, there was like an entire committee set up in there criticizing my body, right? Like, but I had zero awareness of that going in. But when I'm in there, and I was like, it was shocking, shocking. So that's the narrative, the dialogue of your subconscious mind. It's this hum that's running in the background constantly. When you tune into it, then and you listen, then you can redirect it, right? Is what you're talking about. And it's so
Yeah.
important but so much of our day, we're not even aware that we're having this dialogue going on.
Yeah.
And so you want to bring that into the forefront, and then you can work with those pieces. And often there's some woundedness that has happened in people's lives, whether it's trauma from, it could be the same as mine. It could be anything, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse. It doesn't have to be a big T trauma, though. It can be
Yep.
a little T trauma. I was uh, I'll use the word bullied in grade 3. They set up this I Hate Christina club. That was hurtful to me. Again, I'm somebody who's looking for belonging and connection, thinking that I'm someone who's not wanted. And then they set this up. So that was a little T trauma for me, maybe big T. I don't know, whatever. Doesn't really matter whether it's big or little. The point is, and this is what my other teacher says, Gabor Mate, he says, trauma is not what happened to you. It's the beliefs you've made as a result of the experience. That's trauma. So
Yep.
what beliefs did you make to survive that situation, right? And now you want to not make yourself wrong about that. It's about understanding you did that to survive. You formed those beliefs to survive. But now, as a 40-year-old woman, or however you are, that strategy isn't needed anymore. So what were the beliefs? And now what's a new belief we can use instead
Yep.
that will serve you? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's such a powerful exercise to go through. And I think if everyone could just learn that tactic to really examine those thoughts and figure out what those really are, we could seriously change the world. Like if we could just stop living in this automatic inner critic state, we could change the world.
Mhm.
I think that's really powerful. So I could talk to you all day. This stuff is fascinating. I love talking about the brain and how we can direct it to more useful things. But, if people are interested in learning more about you, how can they do that? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, the usual suspects, right? Social media, um, and then my website, and I guess those would be the main places. I have a program that I've created for patients, which is lovely. I have a clinician's training program as well.
Love it.
There's the books, and and then I'm offering a retreat too in the fall in Canmore, and then in March or in the spring of 2025 in Peru, which I'm pretty excited about
Nice.
too. So there's lots of ways to connect and, you know, work together if that so resonates.
I love it. And will you just say your website for everyone? And we'll, of course, link it up in the show notes as well. And then people can reach out.
Yes, my last name's a bit of a doozy, but so it's drchristinabjorndal.com.
Perfect. We will
That's
get that linked up
yeah,
so you can just click on the link in the show notes and not have to worry about trying to spell it right.
exactly.
I
I
love
am
it. Thank
proud of
you.
you for saying it, my name properly. You got it right off the bat. I was
Yeah,
impressed.
I've known a few Bjorndals in my day, so that was not a new name to me, thankfully, because yeah, I can imagine it gets butchered a lot. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing all of your amazing information. I know this has been a powerful lesson, and I think people need to probably listen a few times and then definitely stalk you in all the places and hear all the amazing things that you always share with people. So thank you so much for sharing today.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely. To everyone out there, be blessed and have a great day. We'll see you on future episodes.